All right, now we're going to dive back into our sort of metaphysical language and distinctions to try and put together the how is the Trinity the Trinity. And again, this is a review from what I've covered in previous lectures, as I've already talked about what it means to be an essence, a substance, a subsistent, a mode of subsistence, as well as what it means to be modally distinguished, really essentially distinguished, and so forth. So if you're not sure on what the meaning of those terms are, then you need to go back and sort of review the previous videos, because again, we're moving along here. So what's significant here is that now we've got only one true God, three persons who are God, and the three persons are simultaneously distinguished. How do you begin to explain that? Well, now if you put your hand on your chin for 2,000 years, right? And this is basically what happened, where we had the best and the brightest pretty much in the history of the world for the last 2,000 years thinking about this biblical data. And as physical sciences and scientific theories, we've got 2,000 years of constant improvement and reflection on our theories on how to deal with the data. So what do we end up with that is coherent, makes sense, and is proper explanation? It's actually pretty simple, that God is a single divine substance, okay, existing essence. So we have all the divine attributes that exist in one specific, okay, substance. So numerically speaking, in the genus God, there's only one existing essence, one divine substance. And remember, to contrast that with, for example, the genus Homo sapiens, or human beings. While all human beings share the same kind of essence, we all have the same kind of properties and qualities that make us human, we are all numerically distinct, okay, existing essences. So right now, the last count, there's about 8 billion of us on Earth. So we could say there are 8 billion human substances, where for monotheism to be true, there's only one of them that exists, so numerically distinct. That's significant because when you're dealing with anti-Trinitarians, you've got to be able to explain exactly what monotheism entails. And Trinitarianism affirms there is only one existing divine essence, or one divine substance. There is no second or third or fourth within the genus God. Okay, so now you've got monotheism. So now how do you address the coherency? Okay, now that it's also not as hard as you would think once you understand these things. We've distinguished what a person is previously in the idea that a specific instance of a rational essence. So when we look at the concept of a subsistent, T-E-N-T, as a specific instance of something, okay? Some philosophers and theologians might consider that haexiety, or thisness, where substance is thatness. It can be everything in the genus. We're considering a specific or particular instance of something. So a person would be a specific or individual instance of a rational essence. So for human beings, that's easy. Person one, instance one. Person two, instance two. While we're all in the same genus, Homo sapiens, we can say there's a human subsistent, which is also a human person. There's a second human subsistent, okay, which is a second human person. And substantially, while we're the same genus or the same kind of thing or type of thing, okay, numerically, we're distinguished existing instances of it. Now, when you get to the divine, what we've got is the Son is a distinct instance of the divine rational essence from the Father or the Holy Spirit, and so on and so forth. So now we need to move conceptually to what we'd call a mode of subsistence, where instead of considering only the thisness or particular instance that makes a rational essence a person, an individuated rational essence, now we've got the concept of a mode of subsisting, or a mode of subsistence of a particular essence. So I gave the example, for example, H2O molecules. If I've got a gallon of H2O, okay, and you got a nice gallon jug, the fact is that the whole gallon is H2O molecules and water. But to modally distinguish the way or manner in which H2O can exist, we can distinguish a solid, liquid, or gaseous state or mode of H2O. So in that case, we can distinguish, for example, that ice or the solid form is a different way or mode of subsisting from the liquid way or of the gaseous way. Now, why that can't be an illustration of the Trinity is because the entire gallon of water cannot exist in all three modes simultaneously in its entirety. Okay? You're either going to have to divide it in thirds, where a third of it is ice, a third of it is liquid water, and a third of it is gas or steam. Okay? But not the entire gallon simultaneously. By the way, and that would be a type of tritheism, right? We have to divide it into three distinct quantities of substance. Or move on, you've got some kind of modalism where you start out with a frozen gallon of water and you start melting it, and then eventually it stops being in the ice mode and starts being in the liquid mode. And then you heat it up a little more, and now it's not in the liquid mode anymore. It's changed or morphed into a gaseous mode. Well, that's a progressive type of modalism where it ceases being in one mode and then begins to be in a different mode. Okay, that's not the Trinity. Those are actually Trinitarian heresies. So with that, what's significant is, though, is that we know the idea of a mode of subsisting. So when we look at the divine nature and the divine persons, it's important that we can distinguish in the internal Trinitarian relationships, which we'll get to in a little bit later. We'll talk about monogenes and some of these other ideas. But what's significant here is that the persons are eternally distinct by their internal personal relationships with the other two persons. So, for example, the Father is always the Father because the Father has a unique relationship that's always active with the Son and the Holy Spirit. So the fatherness, and again, is simply a way of relating to the Son and the Holy Spirit. Sonship or sonness is a way of the Son relating to the Father and the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit's way of, or mode of existing, is in relation eternally with the Father and the Son. Now again, each of those is a unique activity or relationship that goes on for all eternity and gives the persons of the Trinity their eternal, what we call hypostatic characteristic or personality. Okay? And what's significant about personhood in the Trinity is that while, again, unique, that the persons are self-aware eternally, always in relationship to the other two. Because they're not three distinct rational substances. There's one rational substance with an eternal activity of one person, always aware that they are the one person in relationship to the other two. That's where the personhood is involved, or self-awareness, where we as human beings, or an angel as an angel, we're an individual instance of a limited, contingent, mutable, created essence. Okay, so we are self-aware in and of ourselves, but we're not always self-aware in relation to other persons. Okay, and that's going to distinguish a human person from a Trinitarian person. So with that, okay, so now we say, all right, there's three modes of subsisting that basically constitute the Trinity. There's a Father way of subsisting in relationship to the other two. There's a Son way of subsisting in relationship to the other two, and a Holy Spirit way of subsisting in relation to the other two. Now, what is that like? Okay, so we'd say the persons are modally distinguished, meaning there is a way that the entire divine essence exists or subsists at once. Well, the one way the entire essence subsists is a Father way. One way it exists is a Son way. One way it exists is a Holy Spirit way. Now, the Trinity, like the person of Christ, both are unique. There is nothing exactly like the Trinity, and there is nothing exactly like Christ as a God-man. Hence, you will never, ever find an exact illustration or analogy for either of those two. You always have to analogize or illustrate parts of it, but not the whole. So that said, The closest illustration you're going to get in the created world is arguably a human soul with its three psychological faculties. Because what you've got with the human soul is a spiritual substance, arguably a simple, undivided, non-composite spiritual substance, which in its entirety exists in, you could say, in a mode of a thinking mode, a choosing mode, and a feeling or affective mode, which corresponds to this soul in its entirety has the capacity of a power of thought, has in its entirety a capacity for the power of choice, and in its entirety a capacity for the power of feelings, okay? And yet, there is an order to the working and operations of the human soul. Thinking as a deliberative power or faculty morphs its way, and this is in a Thomistic model, to the appetitive and choice faculty of the will. And then that morphs into, we see later on, of the feelings or effectiveness of it. Thought, choice, affections. And yet at the same time, thought is not choice, choice is not affections. And these three exist simultaneously, arguably, in an entire undivided human soul. And it's not incoherent to think about it that way. The only time you get to the incoherence is when you start trying to do this with a physical thing, where something in its entirety has to be in three modes simultaneously. Well, God is spirit, so guess what? We're not going to find a physical analogy that encompasses God. So when we look at the concept of who God is, okay, by definition, we get into some important stuff here. So for example, on page 15, roughly in the Trinity handout, and I'll end with this and then we'll pick up on some of the illustrations and Trinitarian heresies later on. As I say, I have three definitions in the syllabus. The simple definition, three persons are the one eternal God. Okay, slightly more complex. The Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are three eternal persons who equally share one infinite, undivided divine nature. You probably have something like that in your church doctrinal statement somewhere. And then, for those studying theology, the higher theology for the purpose of leadership, I have what they call the virtually incomprehensible to the average mortal definition, okay, which is God is an eternal, necessary, infinite, independent, self-existent, immaterial being. There's the oneness, okay, and you could add all the other attributes there, but there's the oneness. That simultaneously subsists in three personal modes. The persons are individually distinguished by their eternal hypostatic characteristics. The Father's hypostatic characteristic is paternity, defined by his unbegottenness and active generation of the Son. The Son's hypostatic or personal characteristic is filiation, defined by his generation from the Father and his procession of the Spirit. And the Holy Spirit's hypostatic or personal characteristic is procession, defined by his emanation from the Father and the Son. The divine persons are consubstantial, that is homoousia, of the same substance, and they co-inhere or indwell each other, okay? That is ultimately a definition of the Trinity, which, if you're saying it's one substance simultaneously subsisting in three modes, there you have some minimal sense of coherency in the doctrine of the Trinity. So next time I'll look at some of the alleged illustrations and the Trinitarian heresies. Thanks.